My name is Jenni Calder, and I'm a trustee of Scottish PEN, which is part of a worldwide organization that campaigns for freedom of expression and promotes international understanding, international exchange. It's been a long and difficult year since the original launch of Scottish PEN's Declaration on Freedom for Writers and Readers should have taken place to commemorate 700 years since the Declaration of Arbroath. And it's wonderful to be doing it at last. And I guess in the perspective of 700 years, an extra year doesn't really matter a great deal. But in the perspective of the past year, this moment does seem to have even more resonance. When I and my fellow editors first began to discuss the Declaration's anthology, we wanted to highlight the freedom that arguably underpins all others, freedom of expression. The response to the invitation to contribute was very heartening and very varied, reflecting many different approaches and many parts of the world, which made the task of selection quite challenging, but hugely worthwhile and always interesting. Since then, issues relating to freedom of expression, freedom of access to reliable information, freedom to challenge orthodoxy, not to mention the basic freedoms of movement and association, have become more pressing than ever, not just in relation to the pandemic, of course, but in the context of the many extraordinary events that have happened over the past year. One of the pieces you're going to hear concerns Myanmar, where freedom of expression has been under savage attack and many hundreds have been killed. Every opportunity to stress how crucial it is for writers to be able to write and for readers to be free to read is to be embraced. So I'm especially pleased to welcome Professor Sir Tom Devine, whose encouragement of the Declaration idea and involvement in the project has from the outset been a great support. He made the final selection of the three prize winners whose work you're going to hear tonight. Sir Tom is the Sir William Fraser Professor Emeritus of Scottish History and Paleontology at the University of Edinburgh. And I think it's fair to say that he has done more than any other contemporary historian to inform the world of Scotland's past and to inform Scotland as well, of course, because an awful lot of Scotland is not terribly aware of its past. So who better to lead this commemoration of such an important event? I'm going to ask him to say a few words, and then I'll be introducing the 8 readers who are taking part. So, Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for that, can I say, over generous introduction. But anyway, very pleased to hear it and to communicate with you today. It was a great honor for me to be asked to judge the quite remarkable list of prose and poetry on the invitation of Scottish PEN to mark the 700th anniversary of that extraordinary document, the Declaration of Arbroath. I mean, in my judgment as an historian, and I'm not alone among historians both within Scotland and the UK and really throughout the world, it is the single most remarkable manifestation in wondrous prose, sonorous prose indeed, of the human being's claim, freedom, both freedom of expression and freedom of action. It's a document not only for the Scottish people, of course, with whom it particularly resonates, but also for humanity at large. So I really do think that it was an inspirational decision by Scottish Pen to memorialise the 700th anniversary by having a competition of print, both poetry and prose, which of course, given the nature of the Declaration, means an intimate connection with it 700 years after it was written. I can assure you that in this period, and I think Jenni has already referred to it, this period of creeping authoritarianism, and as I speak, the horror of what's going on in Myanmar, unbelievable horror in that part of the world, while the world remains silent. And at the same time, groupthink, fake history, hostility in some quarters to the reasonable argument of the basis of fact and conclusion. And not least some of the, and I want to be absolutely clear about this, some of the poison that can sometimes seep out of social media in anonymized form. I can assure the winners and all those who took part in this event that this was probably the most challenging process of decision I have faced in my career. It made grading undergraduate essays and examining doctoral theses as basically straightforward, a form of, if you like, a tea party among scholars. But the excellence of much of what I read during the process that I reflected on the entries was such that it was extremely difficult to come to a final view. I mean, it has to be said, and I say this especially to those who are not among the prize winners, that this inevitably, at the end of the day, became a process of subjectivity and taste. And any other judge may have had another significant level of response. I mean, it's no coincidence that the Booker Prize, for example, is not allocated by one person, but by a committee. Having been on numerous committees, I begin to think actually one person is the best way forward on this. So in order to guide me, I had three particular criteria in mind. The first was that the Declaration of Arbroath, and its resonance of the use of in the original Latin, but then translated into English, is so powerful as a medium of expressing thought that, of course, I was very interested in what William Adamson used to call, as far as poetry and some prose was concerned, as memorable speech. It's something which alerted me to the imaginative possibilities of the English language, and of course the non-English language for those who contributed in other forms. That was one particular measure. The other was to detect relationships between the fundamental values expressed in the Declaration and those which might be considered and thought about and reflected in the entries that came my way. And finally, there was a sense almost that I was looking for the unexpected, for the surprise, for the left flank, for the out of field issue which came up in the entries, which made me reflect more deeply on some aspects of the issues that we will be discussing this evening. So I'm delighted, first of all, apart from congratulating Penn on this marvellous and idea, as I've said earlier, to congratulate Penn, and I must read this to get it right, although the names are actually etched already in my memory. I want to congratulate Donald Adamson, Elspeth Brown, and somebody whose name it's quite easy to remember, Jock Stein, for their excellent contributions, and congratulate them on this or these awards. And I also want to thank not only those who will read tonight, but also all the other contributors who made my task so difficult in coming to a decision. I thoroughly enjoyed the process. And again, I thank Scottish Pen for allowing me to be involved in it. With that, I return to Jenni.
Right, quickly unmuting myself. Thank you very much, Tom, for that. We owe you huge thanks for the task that you performed. So let's move straight on to the readings, and we're going to begin with Donald Adamson. Donald is a poet who writes in English and Scots and also translates from the Finnish. He's one of the 3 Declarations Prize winners and has indeed been a prize winner in many other competitions. His latest pamphlet, which takes as its theme the 3rd age of life, is entitled All Coming Back. And his poem is called The Worth of Freedom. Donald.
Thank you, Jenni. Thank you, Tom. And I'd just like to say I'm very grateful, and it's a huge honor to be among so many wonderful writers. And without more ado, I'll just read the poem, which is called The Worth of Freedom. Certes, freedom is a noble thing for them that's had to fecht for it, them that rots in tyranny's fell giles, and them that arena silenced, them that dare to speak the truth to poor. I'm thinking o' yon lassie, barely a wane, warning o' spreading wastelands, rising seas. Some say she's mental. Others imagine what they do with her. She wasna brought up recht. They'd swiftly scalp the haverings out of her. For freedom, whiles, is ugsome, when it is given to folk with ugsome thoughts, and the will to act on them. Freedom that nae honest man gies up, but with his life, yawns words to ease the hurt. Yet whiles now I'm feared, or full wrath, like Greta, at the thought of where we're gone, and wondering what freedom will be worth, gin earth's like a broken jar, where ilka bonny thing is brent to store.
Thank you, Donald. That was a wonderful beginning. We move on to Elspeth Brown. Elspeth is a poet who's published widely and has read at many events, and is another Declarations Prize winner. Her publications include Starling and Crane, A Crab in the Moon's Mouth, Markings, and Skunk Cabbage. The titles perhaps suggest a key interest in the human connection to the environment. And her poem is called Declaration of Dunbar.
Thank you. I'm very honoured to be part of this wonderful book. My declaration is of Dunbar because I live in Dunbar, which is also doing a lot to try and save the planet. Mine is called Declaration of Dunbar. To whom it may concern out there beyond our universe, let the pen be mightier than plastic particles or carbon waste, mightier than ignorance, cruelty, and prejudice in this year of 2020. We begin this fight by our local harbour with its fishing boats unloading. We strive for our country of Scotland, for our Irish, Welsh, and English neighbours, for Europe, to whom we have long been close, and the diverse world beyond. Let us campaign with the energy of youth alongside Greta Thunberg, with the wisdom of experience alongside David Attenborough. Let us all see we are only one of the creatures of the earth, and the most destructive. We have the words and must use them for all. The walrus with his flippers round his young, the penguin male with his precious egg on his feet, the seal in our harbour, the kittiwakes returning every year, blue hares on the hills, bees, flowers, from the snowdrop to the wild rose, forests of the highlands and lowlands, the dwarf birch shrub endangered in the flow country of Caithness and Sutherland. We need to speak for them all. Even maybe befriend the fly on the windowsill. We will not give up our freedom of speech or our liberty, which no honest man will lose but with his life, while there are still 100 voices crying for our earth.
Thank you, Elspeth. We move on beyond Scotland now. I'm going to ask Linda Lewin to read her piece. Linda is an artist. Sorry, was that an interruption? Linda is an artist, jeweler, and writer with family connections in Myanmar, where currently a violently oppressive coup is using military force against its own people. Linda's writing a book about Myanmar based on her experiences there over 10 years. Her piece is a reminder, if a reminder is needed, that freedom of expression should never be taken for granted. So, Linda.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for this opportunity to speak at a very particular and special time for the people of Myanmar. So I will just begin straight away. The fig tree. When I arrived in the country, I was taken to a pagoda where I found a tenacious fig tree struggling to survive. Each leaf on its branches was inscribed with a word of devotion, pricked out with a pin. Families sat in its shade, eating, sleeping, and laughing. Now, here I was, sitting in an open truck, hurtling along a single-track road with horrifying drops into the jungle on both sides, when a young man flagged us down. He jumped onto the tailgate, and immediately his presence silenced our group. The smiles fell from our faces. A couple of miles further on, the young man directed us to let him down at an army checkpoint. which was an extraordinary construction of terrifyingly sharp bamboo stakes. I could easily have believed a troop of Boy Scouts had camped here, whittling the bamboos with their penknives. But why? For protection against marauding elephants or dacoits armed with lethal darts in the night? No, the army said, we have ceasefire. Our driver wanted to show us his village. He casually waved his hand, explaining we couldn't visit his grandmother's village because it had been burnt down. But now, he said, not to worry, we are safe because ceasefire is agreed. Don't step off the road because we haven't had time to clear the landmines yet. He would take us to his aunt's village instead. Gloria came from a farming village like the one we visited. The houses were built with wood and thatch from the forest. The walls were woven matting. Each building was lifted high off the ground on wooden pillars and entered by a steep ladder. Pigs were tethered in the shadow below the houses. Gloria was the youngest child in her family, but she never knew her brothers because they had left home to work in the mines when she was young. Her mother called her Little Flower of the Forest. Her father was a good man, of few words, but he cared deeply for his family. He lived with two emotions, anger, which he displayed, and fear, which he hid. When she was at home, Gloria slept in her own hammock, and she kept a little mirror, a comb, and a toothbrush tucked into the thatch beside her bed. She was woken every day by the sounds of the black and gold cockerel crowing, rumbling wooden cartwheels pulled by bullocks on the track, and the village boys calling to each other. After breakfast, Gloria ground thanica paste and painted her face with the yellow milk which cooled her skin as it dried. Gloria's mother prepared herself for work by binding cords around her arms and legs to make them strong. Gloria's favorite job was caring for the younger children. Sometimes she took them to search for forest food, insects which they prized out from under the tree bark, edible roots and berries. They gathered hay and stored it in bundles high up in the trees. In the afternoons, they collected firewood. On the morning the shooting started, 3 uncles from the village had gone downstream to check the fish traps. One man was shot in the head, and the other 2 ran for their lives. When they heard the shots, the village families hid themselves in the jungle. Later, they told the police they were cold and frightened and had nothing to eat for days and nights. When they found the courage to return home, their houses had been burnt to the ground and their animals were slaughtered. The army officers in control said they were looking for insurgents, and if the villagers broke the rule of law, they would have to suffer the consequences. They forced the villagers to move to an IDP camp. This gave the children the chance to attend a government school. On their first day, the new students arrived with presents for the teacher. They took sticky rice cooked on the night of the full moon, and the ancient stories of their ancestors told in songs and dances. The teacher rejected their gifts. She did not need to know their names for the insects or the forest fruits. She could not speak the language of hunting and gathering or sowing seeds. These languages were useless now there was no seed left to plant in the scorched earth. Gloria's teacher taught her students the language of unity and progress, the language of the future, the master language, the clattering language of car factories and sewing machines and money. She told them they must learn the new language or they would have to live in the jungle like young monkeys eating leaves and grass. Gloria and her school friends played with the new words. They called them out loud from house to house and chanted their homework just as the teacher taught them. The rhythm of their songs was changed. When Gloria's father heard the new words in his daughter's mouth, every one of them was a physical blow, which compounded his anger and his fear. He beat his only daughter. Her screams made him forget his lost sons. When Gloria's mother saw her daughter's suffering, she fell to the ground. When she could no longer bear to witness the beatings, she took her child to the orphanage and left her there. The nuns gave the child food and clothes and called her Gloria. Nobody called her Little Flower of the Forest anymore. They sent her to school to learn her lessons in English. When Gloria arrived in my class, she was silent. She had no words left. There were more than 130 ethnic languages in Myanmar. They are being felled along with the forest and discarded on the worthless spoil heaps of the mines. Word by word, they fall silent, dropping with the leaves from the trees. I cannot find the ancient fig tree in the pagoda anymore. Perhaps it was a dream. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. That was very, very moving, and just a snapshot of a particular moment in Myanmar's history, which is very relevant to remember given what's going on now.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Jock Stein, our third prize winner. Jock is a piper, preacher, and poet, and he's currently working on a Glasgow University research project on Temple and Tartan, Scotland and the Psalms, which sounds really intriguing. This has included writing long poems on Robert the Bruce and on the Ulera disaster, which after the end of the First World War, the ship that went down as it was approaching Stornoway. Jock is our third prize winner, and his poem is called Tones of Destiny.
Thank you, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be here in this very distinguished company. I should say that my PhD at Glasgow, which I've just finished, did touch on proto-democracy in Scotland and therefore on the Declaration of Arbroath. So I'm very proud to be here tonight. Thank you. Just one thing to mention, in the book itself, this poem for some reason was printed without any stanza breaks. So if you are going to read it from the book, make sure you sort of have a mental or physical line across the page every 4 lines. Tones of Destiny. I want to listen to our story language. Wake, remember who I am. I want to know our stacked up history. I want a hope for the unborn. I want a book that rustles unseen wings, that reads the reader, smiles at her. I want to grow an open heart and mind. I want to find surprising friends. I want St. Andrew's simple bread and fish to feed 1 million Scottish throats. I want Queen Margaret's skill at politics. I want old John the Commonweal. I want to read and write without a censor, access poetry and art. I want the axe which split de Bowen's skull. I want the light Columba found. I want the magic of an island ceilidh celebrating toil and play. I want a life that someone notices. I want to take some public steps. I want the craft of Bellany and Burns, the nous of Hume, the sense of Reed. I want the music Robert Carver spun. I want horizons to be bright. I want to float a little mischief, guaranteed to cheer the sad. I want to raise just 1 or 2 brain dead. I want a cure more deep than pills. I want the faithfulness Jane Haining showed to those who faced the Auschwitz smoke. I want a God who is not deaf or dumb. I want to voice my own requests. I want the mind that James Clerk Maxwell had to integrate his faith and thought. I want the punch of Spark and Connolly. I want the subtle Rankin twist. I want to honour men like Jon Keir Hardie, stand with women seeking space. I want to offer Mary Slessor praise. I want some footsteps I can fill. I want to race with Liddell, Hoy, dream on with George MacDonald, Murray Grieve. I want enough to give to other folk. I want to lose and find myself. I want a government who know the time for referenda and for prayer. I want to see the coming light of dawn. I want a modest nation, wise and free.
Thank you, Jock. A modest nation, wise and free. I think that's something we would all second. We're moving on now to Ricky Monahan Brown. Ricky is a trustee of Scottish Pen. His short fiction and poetry have been widely published, and he's also the author of a book called Stroke, a 5% Chance of Survival. As trustee of Scottish Pen, he is also the chair of its Writers at Risk committee, and the piece he's going to read was first read at a Scottish Pen Day of the Imprisoned Writer event at Bute House, and it is a letter to Lydia Quetro. Ricky.
Thank you, Jenny. It's a huge honour and privilege to be here with you all tonight, and I'll just get right down to it. Dear Lydia, how are you? I suppose that's the most important question, isn't it? How are you? I'm sharing this letter at an event to mark the Day of the Imprisoned Writer, looking to raise awareness of writers at risk around the world. As is the case at many of our events, we are joined by Scottish Pen's empty chair representing writers who cannot be present due to persecution because of their work. Your name, of course, features on the chair as one of the writers for whom we have campaigned in light of your journalism and bravery and what you have suffered for telling the world about how things are in Mexico, how the people are, how the children are, how the outspoken students and the writers and the journalists are, how the corrupt politicians and the sex traffickers are. Now, thanks to you and other reporters in Mexico, those of us who will be thinking of you and other writers at risk know more of the truth about organized crime and its links to politicians in Mexico. Because that's what writers do much of the time, isn't it? Journalists, poets, writers of fiction and non-fiction, writing about how things are and the extremes of human existence and people living subject to extreme conditions, even when the evil to which they might be subjected is, as Hannah Arendt might have observed, banal. When it is inspired by people doing what they are told or trying to achieve professional advancement. It is these writings that might inspire us to try to find empathy for our fellow person and to act. For in another world, we might be that other person, and they might be us. So yes, how are you? I can hardly begin to imagine. I have read of the break-in at your home in July and the theft of your laptop, audio recorder, cameras, and the records of your investigations. Also, the murder of your dogs. I am so sorry. I have read too of the reports that you have had to leave Mexico due to threats made against you. I'm reminded of what was once said of Highlanders here in Scotland, that the greatest hardship for a Highlander is to be obliged to quit the spot where he drew his first breath and to know he will never return. How much worse must that hardship be when you have had to leave your homeland because you are doing such important work for your countryfolk. As I write this letter, I am revisiting your article, I Don't Want to Lose My Head. I am writing once again of how your pen is your lance, your tool, of how your notebook is your port in a storm, of your desire to write, to record that life counts. I read once again your words when you write, I am not alone as long as I can reveal those dreams or pressures, nightmares or ideas, and the words of others. I hope that you're as well as could be hoped, Lydia. We here are better for the existence of your work and that of your colleagues. I hope that you do not feel alone. Sending the very best of thoughts to you, Lydia. Ricky.
Thank you, Ricky. It's perhaps worth mentioning that Scottish Pen has campaigned on Lydia Quetro's behalf for a number of years now. We move on to Elaine Webster. Elaine writes in Scots and English, as her piece will beautifully illustrate. Now retired, she's worked in a number of educational roles, latterly with the Scottish language dictionaries, and she is a trustee of Traditional Arts and Culture Scotland. And her piece is called Freedom of Speech. Elaine.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. Really pleased to be here. Thank you. Edward was a sophisticated chap with cut glass bowels of rank, who was lauded and applauded as he led her down the aisle. Mary's songs grew thinner each day as she muffled her accent to blend in with the pastel lampshade and wallpaper. One day, whilst outside having a picnic of fresh strawberries and slices of quiche, she let the gust from the beach touzle her coarse red hair. She grat from deep inside her as she heard her guddling bairns use the word stones instead of stains. As the nippy peewits screamed at her and the harsh rocks judged, she turned on her heel. Her thoughts had been twisted and teased out tissue thin over the 5 long years in the Trig mid-terrace. She headed off, mapless and alone, in need of a fetal place, to bathe herself in ancient fern, stories and shredded light. She was easing into the piece when snorting creatures rattled the shadows. They smelled fear and were hardened by hunger. The muscle-knotted boars with elongated long snouts sported tainted gold nose rings. Their urgent tusks dug at the path ahead, unsettling boulders until clods of earth careered down the bank, blocking her only exit. Mary paused for several seconds as they paused too, sniffing at the air, watchful. Mary moved one step forward and thrust her whole palm aloft. "Nae mere, just dinny, stop." Muckle black curled shoulders were far fae cowed. The grund was gored. We dared een glowden the craters breens backwards to batter the pure suckling sows we skirling skelping poor. It has been like dawn since then, mares the pity. Mary stravaiged back to fit she his, twa bairns that I hing on her and her lead, her danders up. She bowls round her world, tacking tent o' her wrecks, stunning up for her fine style, hurling Scots like steams van Macken breed, and gusting them with ilka breath. Power walls and a split new fridge are a clarted with declarations. My lead, my choice. dinna had we gurnin meesters, brazen oot, coarse, snotty sneers, gather like-minded friends in chapel doors. Dumbfoonert, Edward's family would spit at her, afore swearing and laughing. Get out of our club, get out of our street, and get back in your box. Grow up, fit in. Your children will never get a job. We cannot understand you. But Mary learns her barefoot bounds fecht on, fecht we and first grievers, sing your hair toot, and I was spit up. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. There's several lessons to be learned from that, I think. Next, we have Helen Bowden. Helen is a writer, educator, and editor whose poetry has been published in many magazines and anthologies. She also writes articles on a wide range of subjects, and her collaborations with visual artists to provide texts responding to place have appeared in a number of books and pamphlets. Helen's poem is called A Declaration of Hush. Helen.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I love the variety and nuance of responses in this collection. It was a delight to read last summer, and when we were able to travel for a few months, I took it on my travels as far as the borders. And I read Jerry Luce's poem from the book when I was at Little Sparta, which seemed like quite a nice thing to do, and Sylvia Ann Tefler's piece about Hermitage Castle, at Hermitage Castle, which was also nice. My piece, I think, like all of them in the book, was written pre-pandemic, and I guess it's a case of be careful what you wish for when you read it now. Yeah, it's called A Declaration of Hush. And it's also a love song to where I live and where I'm lucky to have freedom. The night the year ends and the last bus leaves early, garden birds reoccupy the main drive tarmac. The traffic lights have been out since Christmas Eve. The glow from the pedestrian crossing sign makes a pillar box of the Braidburn Bridge stone pier. I'm not a great believer in keeping calm and carrying on. Don't think we'll need a ministry for hush unless it's to promulgate nurture, keeping counsel, or for guidelines about not passing on our prejudices, embracing neurodiversity, staying in step with other species and those who went before. Before the crescendo of ringtone sirens, high decibel hand dryers, knee-jerk car horns, noisy motorised everything left us in a state of aural emergency. Let's not be so much against speaking up or out when necessary, never hush up what needs said, but more for listening in order to hear rather than to start to formulate a response. Let's be for listening to chaffinch, buzzard, burn and tide, listening for nuance, dialect, inflection, influence, for calling out bias and hate speech calmly. Not standing for devices out loud in the street, someone else's choice of music pervading the park, Premier League matches streamed on top of Alamure, private one-sided arguments on public transport, unnecessary racket and clamour and din. Let's see on-the-spot penalties for idling engines, imposed defunct cycle lanes, NHS, poets in residence in railway stations and hypermarkets, quiet coaches by default, libraries of creature song, tunes of trees, calls of stones, till we can start to hear again our own heart's beat, breath and footfall, the pulse of the Fir Hill, that turn of year quiet on the Braidburn Bridge, volume kept low beyond the 12th night. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Well, maybe indeed a year of pandemic will enable us to hear better. Our final piece is from David Manderson. David is a former academic who has published fiction and non-fiction, and has a particular interest in film. He's currently working on a biography of the screenwriter Alan Sharp. He is a trustee of Scottish Pen, and he chairs its Writers for Peace Committee. And his piece is called Declaration, Language, Freedom, Voice. David.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you to everybody for this excellent reading. I've really enjoyed it. So Declaration, Language, Freedom, Voice. Many people lose the right to the freedom of speech. Ask migrants in open boats, people living in poverty, children and older people mistreated in care homes, but nobody ever does. It's easy to silence someone who's voiceless anyway. People are being disenfranchised and exploited the world over, and the literature of Scotland has not been free of tyranny either. We also have ways of silencing ourselves. How can we continue to talk freely as we move into a new political decade? The past can tell us a few things. The statue to John Wilson on Princes Street Gardens honours a bully. As Christopher North, Wilson was responsible for some of the most mawkish and sentimental writing in the whole of Scottish letters. He was also, as editor-in-chief of Blackwood's, a scandalous Edinburgh rag, one of the most powerful publishers in Scotland. Incredibly, he moonlighted as Professor of Moral Philosophy at the University of Edinburgh. He knew nothing about philosophy and used to beg a friend for lecture notes. Wilson could spot a good Gothic horror story, but other than that, he probably did more damage to the literature of his country than anyone else through his influence and taste, not least in his own fiction. The person he perhaps hurt most was his fine friend and colleague, James Hogg, satirising him monthly as the figure of the Ettrick shepherd in his magazine, skinning him alive as the bull roarer, as he liked to style himself, boasted. Wilson invented a voice we can still sometimes hear today, braying, overloud and deaf to whatever its listeners make of it. It says outrageous things to anger and distract the people who hear it, and silences the one who might oppose it, because it deliberately ignores what they might say. It's also a form of public entertainment, outwardly bluff and hearty, and wholly dedicated to his own aggrandizement. It was no accident that Wilson was an enthusiastic supporter of the imperial nation state. The sun would never set on it, as he was the first to say. But there were elements of Scottish writing that he could not command. One reason Scottish writing survived was because Scots, its subterranean language, lived on, and Hogg and Wilson both wrote it. Although a despised patois of the lower orders, often appearing as homely verse in local newspapers, its qualities of guttural beauty and earthy lustre lasted. It was more than a manner of speaking, it was a way of thinking and of seeing an outlook, and it endured because it was as tough as a weed and continued to grow. Hugh Mcdermott, one of Scottish Pen's founders, took Scots as it was practised at the start of the 20th century into synthetic Scots and the Scottish Renaissance, although he owed more of a debt to his predecessors Marian Angus and Violet Jacob than he acknowledged. In 1962, he clashed with Alexander Trochy at the Edinburgh Writers' Conference. Their debate was not so much about nationalism versus internationalism, as was thought at the time, as about new kinds of language and subject matters in that decade. Tom Leonard, Ian Hamilton Finlay, James Kelman, and the writers they inspired let the genie out of the box. There was no longer such a thing as official Scots, just dialect, street talk, accents, Edinburgh junkies, Glaswegian hardmen, queer adventurers, exploited women, anyone who wasn't supposed to have anything to share with the rest of us, told us their stories in their own voices. And they were often accounts of loss, pain, bitter humour and delusion that took us to heights that had hardly existed since Hogg's Confessions, itself written in response to being marginalised. Some of the best Scottish writing was, and still is, this kind of demotic, apparently confessional, but sometimes unreliable outpouring, a vernacular spectacular, as the Scotsman once put it. Today, Scotland is a peaceful place of debate. It continues to carry its languages through the devolutionary era. The right to freedom of expression is its principle. Its core is marginalised voices. But today, too, the bull roarer's voice is back. We can hear his clamour from the new wave of right-wing politicians, bluff, blustering tones that see no need to compromise and are not interested in discussion. Like Wilson, their owners have gained power on the strength of personalities that mask their real intentions. Their performances attract the public, as do their offers. They know our weaknesses. Bread and circuses may be available in Scotland soon. As the UK seals its borders and takes back control, it is possible to be depressed about where we may be heading, but letting your opponent control your thinking is a mistake. Instead, let's dream of ourselves as one place among others, and internationally connected of smaller territories, a web of connections where we can have the confidence to keep an open mind and the freedom to talk and to share, to say what we believe and listen to what other people say, and to be willing to change through it. Identity isn't inside us, it's what we make of it. How may we achieve this? By talking, debating, calling out hate speech when we hear it, enjoying what we admire, by keeping a sense of proportion, by working as if we are in the early days of something, by befriending our neighbours, French, English, Dutch, by learning and listening, by using our languages and voices and encouraging others to do the same. And we must dismantle our internal barriers, the ones we put up ourselves, the fears we invent, the walls of shame, the jealousies we foster, the way we seal ourselves in. We make borders because they divide our hearts, and we deck them with flags because, like the demagogues, we don't have the courage to face ourselves. But no one else can do it for us. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free the mind, as the man from Jamaica said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. A web of connections. I think in many ways that was what this whole project was all about. A big thank you to all who have taken part and all of you who have been listening, especially to Sir Tom Devine for his much appreciated support. Thanks also to Hospitalfield, who and their commitment to the initial project, and to them for deciding that they were not going to let the commemoration, they were not going to let the pandemic stand in the way of commemorating the Declaration of Arbroath. And a special thank you to Rebecca Sharp, who has been invaluable in making this all happen. And thank you again to all of you for attending. If you're not already a member of Scottish Pen and feel inspired to join, you can do so through our website, scottishpen.org. And finally, a reminder that you can, of course, purchase the book. You can purchase it from our website at a special price of £7.50, and also direct from Scotland Street Press. And I want to add my thanks to Jean Finlay at Scotland Street Press, who responded with such alacrity when we went to her with this notion that an anthology might be published, and very supportively and efficiently made it happen. So thanks to all. There is, I noticed that we do have some comments in the chat. I don't know, we perhaps have a minute or two to, can we bring back Lisa at this point, and see if there's a time to share what is in the chat.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so to be honest, Jenny, it's a lot of positive feedback, so I think we can be really really pleased about that. It's lovely to see people responding just directly after the readings, and yeah, let's keep that up. Of course, as Jenny said, you know, Scottish Pen publishes a lot of information on our website, but we also have our Twitter channel and Instagram, and yeah, let's kind of keep the community feeling together and stay in touch. I think the spirit of the anthology, the energy of it really comes across tonight. So it's lovely to see, and thank you all so much for your time. And yeah, if anyone does have any particular questions they'd like to follow up on after tonight, please do feel free to drop us an email as well at info@scottishpen.org, and yeah, we'll be happy to keep that conversation going. So yeah, just to be honest, I'm scrolling through and it's a lot of positive things, so I don't think you have anything in particular to answer to, Jenni.
Oh, thanks, Lisa, and thanks to you for making it all happen, handling all the technical stuff. That's been great. So a final thank you to you all for taking part. Those of you who don't have the book, do try and get hold of it. There's lots of good stuff in it. You've just had a taste.